Hello and welcome to the Salt Strong live stream and podcast. My name is Rich Natoli. I am one of the fishing coaches with Salt Strong. And as usual, I am joined by the lovely and talented Ed Gobo, owner of Captain Hank's Tackle. Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rich. Doing well. I got my new boots today, so I'm ready for Wednesday to go
Oh, you
fishing.
got you got the NRS boundary boots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, love
Yeah.
those things. Love those
Yeah.
things. If anyone, I'll just tell you, if you're a kayak fisherman in cold weather, you want to look into getting the NRS boundary boots. They're awesome. I'm not sponsored by them. We don't get paid by them. It's just they're really, really nice boots to keep your feet dry
And
when
they're
you're launching.
comfortable too.
They are. They're very comfortable. Yeah. So we're going to be jumping really quickly into this one. Want to first of all say thank you to everybody who has made their way over here from the other live streaming channel that we were using in the past, Fat Dad Fishing, over to Salt Strong. Welcome to everybody. This is a regular Monday night live stream that we're doing, and then we follow it up with the audio being repurposed for a podcast. Now, the last episode has not made it onto the podcast yet. Still working out some of the details with that, but it looks like we're going to have the audio on the podcast through Salt Strong every Friday morning at 5 a.m. So when you get up to go to work, or if you play hooky and it's a great day to hit the water and you're heading down to the water, you can tune in,
Listen
you
to
can
our
get me
lovely
and
voices.
yeah, that's exactly what you want early in the morning. We'll keep you awake when you're driving with our with our annoying voices and banter. So that's coming out shortly. I'm going to apologize in advance. I had COVID a couple weeks ago, and for some reason I'm still coughing. So if you see me muting and everything and coughing, I apologize. I'm doing my best. Let's say hi to the people that are in the chat right now. There are a lot of people watching. I don't know that you're there unless you are in the chat, but the people that I see in the chat right now: James Phelps, I Feel Fishy, Mark Smith, 84, Participation Trophy Fishing, John Kern, Captain Scotty Sevins, who's joining us in a moment. He's backstage right now. KB 7771, Jack West, and Richard Lynch. Everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming by. And listen, this is a question answer interactive live stream and podcast. So it's all about all of you. So if you ever have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get to every one of them that we can. If you just want to talk amongst yourselves, go right ahead. Have fun. That's what it's all about tonight. We're going to be bringing Scotty on in a minute. He's dealing with some technical issues in the background. So until that point, Ed, we weren't going to talk about this.
I was going to say, so
real quick.
We got some
how was
your
last fishing trip?
Well, it was good. So me and you and John Kern actually went out. Was it Tuesday? For some striper. I caught a nice 26-incher up here in Jersey. The minimum is was it 28 to 37.9, so it wasn't a keeper, so it went back.
Right.
A little later on in the day, we were fishing some some eddies in the current, and I ended up rolling the kayak. So I mean, the water temp was 60. What was it? 62. Air temp was 55. So it was a little bit chilly. Nothing too crazy. I didn't lose any gear, didn't get hurt, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But if I can stress one thing to you guys, if you're out in the kayaks, especially this time of year, be practiced in your self-rescue stuff. I was quite unprepared. Thankfully you were there with the paddle float. I was able to haul my big butt back in, but out front or in a heavy traveled area, it could have gotten dangerous. So
yeah, and I will say Ed has ignored me for a long time when I've told him about the safety gear, practice self-rescue. If you're in a kayak, especially in the cold water, you need to know how to rescue yourself if you go in the water. The water temperature was fine, 60 degrees, 59 degrees, something like that. So not a big deal. But getting back in it can be a problem. So I'm actually, what I told you is I'm glad I was there to help, even though it cut the day short. I was glad that I was there to, I had the paddle float. And I'll tell you one thing. You want to see a fat guy pedal a kayak from about, I don't know, a half a mile away, when I was looking at Ed and he just disappeared. And I was like, oh no, I thought he passed out. So it was a 5-mile-per-hour pedal, which is pretty quick against the current. And I made it over there, and he's just like looking at me. So it all worked out, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I know guys like to wear the extra tough boots when they're on the kayaks, and I religiously wear mine. Do not wear them because you cannot swim, or be prepared to lose them because you got to kick them off to keep yourself afloat. Even the ankle boots, they fill up with water, and you can't kick to keep yourself up. So,
which is why you have the NRS boundary boots now. So yeah, so welcome to the club. A lot of people have capsized, myself included. Looks like Scotty has his computer worked out, so we're going to jump right over. We're going to talk with. Well, let's bring him on the stream here first. And are you able to see him?
I do not see him.
Oh no, he froze. He froze, people. That's okay. We'll let him get.
We got some chatting going on. So
yeah,
it's
the joys of a. It's the joys of a live stream, right? That where things are going to work and then they're not going to work. It's all good. We got plenty to talk about until Scotty can get his stuff set and ready to go. So here's one from John C. Most kayakers have no flotation vest. That is correct, and it is definitely a big concern. I actually am. I worked for a nonprofit as well, Kayak Fishing for Beginners. And it's all about safety. And I'll tell you what, we do not allow in that group any pictures on the water if you're not wearing a PFD. I don't care if it's 1 foot of water, if it's 60 feet of water, if it's 35 feet where you went over, Ed. Even if it's 1 foot of water. My first reaction was when I saw you, he passed out because the kayak didn't capsize. You went over.
Well, I felt the kayak starting to get like. So the big water that I was fishing has a lot of primary stability, but no secondary. So I felt the boat start to like get upset, and I knew it was going. So I bailed off it before it completely rolled.
Yeah. But I'm always going to recommend it. Even if you pass out in 2 feet of water, a couple inches of water, if you're face down and you don't have anything on, it doesn't hurt. So always use the PFD. Let's try to get Scotty on here and see if it works. Captain Scotty Sevins, welcome.
What's going on, guys?
What's up, bud?
Little bit of this stressful few minutes there. I don't know what happened. I was having some glitches, but everything seems to be all right now.
That's all right. I mean, listen, we're just talking fishing, and we'll talk through everything we can on striped bass. And look, if there's going to be technology issues, it's all good. We'll keep talking and you can try to reconnect. We'll figure it out, man. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll just roll with it. But you guys said a lot of good things, and just going back to what you were talking about real quick with the PFDs, like the year I broke my foot, 2018, is when I bought my first PFD. And because I was still fishing by myself and I had a cast on. So if I fell in, I wouldn't have been able to swim. And it's something that I always have with me on my boat. I suffer from, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I have a tendency to get really lightheaded and I can sometimes come close to passing out. So, I mean, like you were talking about, if you go in the water, like even a few inches, like that's enough to drown. You know what I mean? So PFDs, safety, like that, anything safety, like give me anything you have safety equipment and I'm all for it and I'll wear it. So.
Yeah. And if you get a kayak, we're talking the kayak specifically right now, but get a kayak vest with the high back. And people say it's uncomfortable. No, it's not. You can get used to wearing it. You won't know you have it on. It doesn't hit the back of the chair. You're good. Just wear it. It's definitely worth it. So but let's introduce you to everybody because I don't know that everybody knows Captain Scotty Sevins out of New Jersey. Why don't you say a little bit about your business and what your main targets are?
So basically, I'm a guide out of Ocean City, New Jersey. I've been in and around Ocean City just about my entire life. Been on the beaches since I was a couple weeks old. Just grew up fishing the Ocean City area. I mean, like my roles were sort of reversed. I kind of grew up doing a lot of offshore fishing and found my way into backwater fishing. After, just to make a whole long story short. And that's when I found my peace and serenity, is like when I connected with the marsh and with the backwater fishing. That's my home. That's my church. Like that's where I feel the most at peace within my soul. And I'm sure that everybody out there can really connect and vibe with that, because I mean, ultimately, that's why most of us fish, and everybody has their niche. Mine just happens to be with backwater. So basically, my big targets are sheep's head. Number one, striped bass, of course. Striped bass for us in New Jersey and in the Northeast, that's like a way of life for us backwater guys and even the inshore guys, because I mean, let's face it, we don't have a lot of fish to target. Tog, that's another big thing. So I want to say my biggest things are the tog, sheep, striped bass.
Right.
So, and false albacore, can't forget about them around.
Yeah, so that's like your guilty pleasure, right? You're not guiding for. I mean, it'd be a really tough business.
Yeah, that's just when they're around.
Yeah, so that's where you're happy when you don't have a charter, you have a few minutes, you can just run the inlet.
No kidding, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Captain Sevins is pretty well known in New Jersey for his ability to get onto the backwater stripers. And look, let's just call it what it is. We don't have the big waters like the Chesapeake, right? So those down in Maryland and Virginia, they're heading out, a few miles. We have 3 miles offshore and in. That's the only, that's the only place that you can catch them in New Jersey. So it is a lot of backwaters. It's a lot of surf, and it's a lot of near shore. And you do all of those, right?
Correct.
Except maybe the surf, right?
And I'm not a real big surf guy, especially for striped bass. I would love to be. It's just not my forte. You know what I mean? So,
right.
But even specifically to us, to like the rest of the state of New Jersey, like you have Northern Jersey, you have the whole Raritan Bay fishery where you're still fishing huge bodies of water. We don't have that. What we have in South Jersey is we have marshes. So we have to work with what we have. And we may not have the fishery that say North Jersey does in Raritan fishery, but our fishery is special to us and to our area. And it presents a multitude of opportunities that they don't necessarily have up there as well. So, I mean, every area is a trade-off. I'm very grateful. I love our area. I love the marsh game. It's more of a hunt than it is anything else, and that's something that vibes with my soul. I love that part of it.
Yeah, it's a different area, but I think it's also important, so that's where you're focusing a lot of your time and your energy. At the same time, and this is going to be the first thing I want to talk about is spots, right? Like what type of spots. A lot of what you're going to say is going to translate to areas that don't have marshes, right? It does still translate to the Raritan Bay. It does translate to the Chesapeake, the Delaware Bay, Long Island Sound. It all translates because it's characteristics of areas that, okay, so maybe there's not a marsh there or a sod bank, but you have something similar. You still have similar structure in the other areas.
And what it comes down to is really like in the marshes is your ability to read water. And that is a strength that you need to sharpen no matter where you're at. You know what I mean? Your ability to read current breaks, work a current sweep properly, I might add, because there's there's a right and a wrong way to work a current sweep, and if you don't work it properly, like you're not going to get bit. And then moving over to like more of the marsh, rip line, you have your rip lines. Like, say you have an entire marsh system. There could be fish anywhere, but the thing of it is usually with a marsh, say you're working a set of bank, there's only going to be fish on 5% of that bank. 95% of that bank is not going to hold fish. And it comes down to, like I said, your ability to read a bank and read water. And and especially in the marshes, when you could, because you don't have a bridge, to be able to work. So you don't have like that obvious visible structure. So you're trying to read the structure, like the natural structure in a natural marsh environment. And like that's where the hunt comes down, because there's times when you'll stumble across this perfect point with this nice water flow coming across, and there's nothing there. It's a dead zone,
Right.
and it's like, why? There should be fish here, and there could still be, but it could come down to a whole bunch of other reasons, lure, cadence, whatever. But yeah, so like I said, reading water is like one of the biggest things.
Yeah. So let's talk in general, the spots, right? So that's the first question everybody has. And listen, once we talk this, don't hang up, right? Stick around, because it's more than just the spots, right? But let's talk about the spots. So first, you did mention one, bridges. Bridges are, if you're in the backwaters, bridges are outstanding for striped bass. It's to me why they call them rockfish. Bridges have the same type of structure characteristics as rock piles. So bridges and rock piles are definitely, jetties are definitely spots. What are you looking for in the backwaters when you're looking for striped bass?
So when it comes to bridges in particular, are you asking?
Or anything? I mean, it could be outside of the bridges. What other types of structures would you want to look for?
And that's another thing. So, like I said, we have talked about this before, but your electronics is like one of the single most important things that you can invest in, aside from your fishing rods and your fishing platform. I assume like a lot of guys are fishing on kayaks out there, some on boats. But having a decent electronic system is going to change the game entirely for you. Like I know Ed and I were talking this week. He just got a new fish finder set up on his kayak, and it changed the game for him, didn't it?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah, big time.
I can see a lot more stuff than what the old one would let me.
So as far as what you're talking about, like with spots like that, I always have my eyes glued to my sounder. I always have my fish alarm turned on, number one. So I am always listening for that audible beep, even when I might be up front where I can't see the sounder. So I'm constantly listening for that. So as far as things that I'm looking for, when I roll up to, say, a bridge, I never just stop and start fishing. I always do my scans of the perimeter, side scan, down scan. With my machine in particular, it has the fish reveal on the down scan image, which takes a lot of the guesswork out of what might be fish and what's not. So never just stop and start fishing. You always want to do a quick scan, find out where the fish are sitting on like a bridge system or a jetty or whatever the case may be of what you're targeting. And it's going to paint a picture of how you're going to start fishing, because I would say 90% of the time when you roll up on, say, a bridge system, the fish aren't showing. The fish aren't popping in lights. And just because they're not showing doesn't mean that they're not there. And
Right.
Your electronics is going to paint that picture of where they're sitting and where they're set up. And I will say this, that I have had some of my best nights fishing on some of the best and biggest when they're not showing and everything appears to be dead on the surface. So just because you roll up into an area and you're not seeing anything on the surface, don't get discouraged. It doesn't mean that they're not there.
So that actually plays in well with this question that Todd at last put up. What do you look for on the fish finder? So I'm assuming like what do the fish look like on the machine itself?
Yeah, so I wish I had sounder pictures that I could put up here. So basically, I'm looking for check marks. It almost looks like an upside down boomerang a lot of times, and you'll see them. You'll see them grouped together. And this is where, like I was saying, if you turn your fish alarm on, that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it because that thing's going to be going off. You're going to hear it, and when you hear that,
Hold on.
you'll know that there's something going on. And even if you're not used to looking at a fish finder and seeing what a fish might look like, you'll be able to go over to the fish and you'll be able to see the difference in the screen going on. Also, another big thing with your fish finder is being able to locate underwater structure, whether it could be debris piles, rock piles, that stuff is all key when trying to get on fish and find fish, because just because you have a bridge system doesn't mean that those fish are situated on that bridge all the time. You know, they may be hanging off the bridge or hanging off the structure. They might be below, hanging on a big pile of stuff that you never knew was there. So that's
Right.
why electronics are so important.
Yeah, and
So that's
just
what I'm looking for, really.
to give it a little bit more of a description, if you're not sure what they look like. Now, part of it does depend on the color scheme that you have on your fish finder, right? So I have mine set up right
Very
now.
good
It's
point.
really a yellow and a red. And
Mhm.
what it looks like when you're stopped or you're drifting, so around 1 mile per hour drift is, now the bigger fish, it is yellow on mine. The smaller ones are more of a reddish orange color. And there'll be long squiggly lines
I
and
do
they'll be
have
overlapping. So
I do have a photo like I can show on my phone to this camera if you want to
yeah, go ahead.
see it, if it'll come through.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah, that's perfect.
yeah. So you can see okay, so you have a different color than mine, but you can see the way that those lines are above the bottom. The bottom's the orange. And then
Right.
it's those little slashes or lines. And the reason that they're so long, thank you, Ed, for putting that up. The
Yeah.
reason that they're so long is because he's drifting or he's almost stationary. So it's a very long ping. It's a long return. Now, when you're moving at a higher rate of speed, that's when you start getting those arches. And learn your fish finder, because the colors and the color palette that you choose will often allow you to discern the sizes, the relative size of the different fish that you're going over. So you'll know when you're going over the big fish or you're just going over a ton of bait. And it's a good question. It's interesting. I was actually out over the weekend, and I was I think it was on a Saturday, and I was coming down a sod bank channel back in the marshes, and I was getting a lot of returns, but it was all red. And I was like, all right, well, there's the bait. And then I hit just this massive wall of yellow squiggles, and that's where the bigger fish were. Yeah, so it's one of those things where
Yeah.
you have to be able to discern between the two.
You definitely do. And after you been looking at it for a while, you'll be able to tell the difference between what you're looking at. Like, I can tell the difference between weak fish, bass, sheep's head. Weak fish, even just to give you an idea, they have what they are reading mostly is a swim bladder. your returns for a weak fish are going to be much bigger than, say, a striped bass would be because they have a much bigger swim bladder. So lines will be like big, chunk, fat lines when it comes to weakies. So that's just different things to keep in mind. And a lot of times it's reading densities as well. So those darker reds are going to be showing like a
I think we lost him.
makes any sense. Can you hear me?
Rich, you're muted.
Yeah, so let's wait for his screen to clear up a little bit.
Can
And
you hear me now?
yeah, just hold on a second, Scotty. When your screen clears up, I'll assume that your audio's back in good shape. But we do have a couple of questions that we can jump in right here with. Ed, do you have any lined up, or do you want me to go grab one?
I had one, Todd again. Do you jig the Mojos? They make a smaller, like a casting Mojo.
So
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah, you might want to jump out, Scotty, and jump back in.
Okay.
As for the Mojos, me personally, I'm not. I actually don't use Mojos. I know they're big for trolling. I don't do a lot of trolling. I'm also in a kayak, so I'm not really incredibly interested in using the Mojos myself. They do work. I use a bucktail, which to me is pretty similar. So if you're jigging a Mojo and you're jigging a bucktail, you're probably going to get pretty similar experiences out of them, or at least it feels that way. Scotty, are you using the Mojos when you're jigging at all, or have you tried them?
So when I hear the word Mojo, I associate that with trolling. Is he referring to more of a bucktail? I'm not exactly sure, but and I'm just going to equate this to more like backwater. When I'm jigging, yes, I am jigging. A lot of what I'm doing is casting, and your retrieve case is, let's say, to be one of the biggest, like the biggest differentiators between you catching. Yes, jigging and finding your base is going.
Yeah, he might have to restart his computer at this point. Yeah.
But I can answer Todd's question as well with the Mojos. Yeah. They're trolling lures. They do make a casting one, but typically, like we troll, my dad, when we take the boat out, we'll troll Mojos and umbrella rigs.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard. Look, I'm just going to be totally honest with you. I just haven't used the Mojos. I use the bucktails if we're going to be jigging something like that. People that I have fished with use them though. You know, the smaller ones. You know, they're what are they 2.5 ounces? So they're much smaller. They're still pretty heavy for what I would typically use for jigging. But I'm not on them as much. And I will say, look, for everybody, if you want to talk about trolling and Mojos and everything, we're going to have a guest coming on, hopefully within the next 2 weeks, that's going to talk specifically about trolling for striped bass. So we are going to have an expert on that. Trolling for striped bass is not my forte. It is not going to be Ed's, and I don't believe it is Captain Scotty's either. You're not out there trolling.
No, not at all. In fact, and I don't say this to discourage anybody. You have to fish however you can fish. But if I have to resort to trolling for bass, I usually just want to go home. You know what I mean?
It's not for everyone.
There's no doubt. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. It works, right? If you like trolling, please go out and troll. If you like jigging, please go out and jig. If you don't care, as long as you catch fish, just do whatever's working. So I'm not judging. I'm not one of those people that say boat stripers don't count. Only beach stripers count, or only kayak. No, they all count. So do your thing. Now let's kind of, before we move on, let's kind of wrap up the spots. So in the backwater, let's say you're deep in the marsh systems or deep in the backwaters. Are you fishing docks at all?
So deep in the backwaters, no, I'm not. So
okay.
I'll give you just a quick play-by-play of a recent trip that happened just last week. So we were still in a little bit of like a tough cycle. The marsh bite had just started to pick up some, and closer to the inlet, I wasn't finding anything. So the further I pushed back, it was weird, the more life I was finding. So I started working a line of a bank system, right? And as soon as I stopped in an area, you have banks and you have contour. And I started my first cast into a cove system. As I was retrieving back, I probably had a school of about 8 or 10 bass cracking my top water the whole way back to the boat until I basically ran out of real estate. And this basically happened for like the next 4 or 5 casts while I was in this system. So immediately I'm thinking, I need to find, they're not liking something about this topwater thing, or like immediately I'm thinking if I would have had subsurface on, I would have caught those fish. But the funny thing is they weren't reacting at all to anything subsurface. I couldn't buy a bite on subsurface. They wanted it was topwater. But basically you want to find your contours. So like for me, if I'm looking at a bank system, I fish very, very quickly because I want to cover a lot of water. So if I'm in a section where there's just a long, straight bank with not much of a contour, I will skip that entire area entirely until I get to something that has more contours, points, coves, that sort of thing. Creeks coming out. And the weird thing was on this particular day, these fish on like a harder outgoing tide, you would think would be staged up in front of some creek mouths feeding. They weren't at all. They were very much off the bank systems and either dead center cove or off the bank by a good stretch. By like it's almost more like open water. So you're basically looking for that structure. And when you're talking about banks and marshes, your structure is going to be your contours. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I think it does. Mm-hmm. I was on my Saturday trip. It was launching very deep as well, right at the very back of a sound. And I was riding the outgoing tide. And I was fishing my way out to the inlet. It's going to stop for some tog and then ride the current back in, basically skipping a lot, but just to make it an easy, 3 or 4, however many mile trip back to the truck.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, to your point, I had a whole bunch of spots marked out along the way that I wanted to try. And about half of them were creek mouths. And then there were a bunch of points. And then there were some just the contours on the side of the sod banks. And, I hit them at the first point and I was like, okay, I can't stay here all day. I've got to go a few miles before the tide turns.
Yeah.
I wasn't getting anything at the creek mouths. And then I started finding them at the contours in the sides of the thing. Now, with that in mind, there was also a lot of structure on the bottom where I was finding these fish, but there were 0 fish that were showing up along the long straightaways on these channels. I mean, none.
Are you referring to deep banks?
Yes, these were deep banks. They were dropping from, the sod bank down to probably 4 feet for about the first 2 feet, and then it would drop down to 12 to 16 feet.
Yeah, and that, especially this time of year, like I can't understate how incredibly productive those sorts of systems can be. Yeah. Because what's happened over the course of the last 50 to 100 years, that sod bank's being eroded and that whole face has been falling down over the last 50, 100 years. And all that stuff that has fallen off the bank and caved in is all laying on the bottom underneath the water. So next to that bank, you'll have like a sheer wall there, and you might have a huge pile of debris that's just holding all sorts of crabs, nutrients, bait fish, that sort of thing. That is very prone structure, especially for this time of year.
It is.
Or really.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Rich, what would you classify when we fished on Tuesday? What would you classify that as? A deep bank? I mean, that's an interesting spot there.
Yeah. So just to give a sense to people without giving up the actual spot, it was it was deep. It's 35 feet. And it went, and there were very narrow channels that were kind of filtering the water through. So very fast currents ripping through as it's condensed into this area. I actually considered that to be more of open water, deep water, because we weren't fishing the structure of the land or any rocks or anything like that. We were fishing the current breaks out in open water.
Yeah.
So to me, that's an entirely different thing. That is not my favorite thing to do, which Eddie, you saw me, I kept leaving, going to other places. It's not that I don't like it. It's just not the way that I have the most fun. So, I like to go up against the sod banks. Now, the challenge there, Scotty, was these were sod banks that were bordered by hundreds of feet of 2-foot water. So they had to be up in the flat leading up to the marsh, which is a totally different thing than those deep drop banks in some of the other marshes.
Completely.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think we covered some of the spots. Now let's go into some of the tactics. Now, do you have different tactics for nighttime versus daytime?
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because it's something that we haven't really gone over a whole lot, but my tactics for nighttime striped bass are entirely different than during the day. And I will basically go as far as to say it's an entirely different game completely, and some of the things that I'd like to use and the ways that I like to target striped bass at night, it's like completely different fishery. And I'll just go into like real quick some of the things that I'd like to use, especially for nighttime. Nighttime, I'm definitely looking for, more like bridges, shadow lines, that sort of thing, and still that deep rubble that and deep structure that's holding fish. But some of my favorite ways to target them and some of my favorite things to use are stuff like little paddle tails like this. This just happens to be Northeast Jig Co. And there is something about this particular color, the Tide Runner, I believe it is. This is a special color for nighttime striped bass fishing. That for me is like one of my favorites. If I'm using a paddle tail, that color really produces. And the big thing is when I'm targeting striped bass on artificials, especially at nighttime, is slowing down your retrieve almost to a painfully slow pace. And I'm the guy, that old cliche, if you feel like you're reeling slow, reel it slower. It's absolutely true. And there's nights, and you have to find out what the bass are looking for that night. Because I have had nights where I thought that I was like, I would do my typical nighttime retrieve, the real slow with some imparted action with the rod tip. And I just wasn't getting bites. And then just by happenstance, I will get distracted, stop moving my lure, and I start getting bites and figure out that the fish are hitting on a pause. Like some nights they don't want a moving lure at all. They'll hit baits that are completely still. So don't be afraid to try things like that. And it's all about putting together that puzzle piece, because every single night is going to be a different puzzle than the night before. And that is like one of my biggest pieces of advice. Also, bass, when they're in shadow lines, you really can't beat a pink zoom.
Yep.
And especially like there's certain times of the year, like when I start getting into like November fishing at night, that December fishing, you cannot beat a pink zoom. In fact, there are very few times at nighttime, especially like I said, when fish are like surface feeding, that they won't hit pink zooms. Like that is that should be in everybody's toolbox. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely use those. There are a couple of things I want to mention about night. We have one question. When you say night, you're
Yeah.
talking all of the above: dusk, midnight, early AM. You're talking dark.
I'm talking dark. I'm talking black. In fact, I mean, nighttime for me and for what we do, nighttime striped bass fishing, that's almost, you can't beat it. That is the time when they are the most active. They are feeding the heaviest usually. I mean, there's times of the year where you do really well during the day.
Yeah.
But my preference is to target striped bass at nighttime. And I became really good at doing it. Like that's how I cut my teeth. You know, fishing for striped bass is fishing for them at nighttime, you know, and you're usually going to catch your biggest, and you're going to get your biggest numbers fishing at night for sure. No doubt about it. And just some other things like why we're on the nighttime subject, especially when fish are holding a little bit deeper. I love going with the Band of Art Anglers dart spin. You cannot beat these lures. These lures will basically catch anything that swims. This particular color would be my number one go-to color for deep jigging and striped bass holding deep. That is the Wild Shiner. It's a really dark, sparkly gold. Usually go with something like a half-ounce jig head all the way up to an ounce, and working that close to on or close to the bottom. But if you can't see this, or you never heard of the dart spins, they basically have these little spinner tails. So this lure, it's basic. It is impossible to mess up the retrieve with this lure. You could hand this to a novice and they can catch fish on this. That I promise you. So basically, even as this lure is sinking through the water column, that tail is spinning. It's always constantly going. So that is going to be like one of my number ones for bass holding deep.
Yeah, I actually used that, Scotty, the other
you?
day, and I stopped reeling. I don't know why. I wasn't intending. That wasn't the cadence I was using when I was reeling in. I stopped reeling. It's just on a free drop, and it only had an 1/8 ounce weighted hook on it, so it's not sinking fast, but it's still moving. And that's when I picked up the fish. It actually surprised me because I wasn't actively working it at that second. It was not an intended pause, but I paused. So I actually can't wait to go back and see what the heck I was doing on video when I hooked up. But I wasn't actively working it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And those little nuances, like they will make the difference between you putting fish on the boat and not, and doing it again and repeating that in the future. Because you know, once you figure out what you're doing, that is just another feather in your cap and another thing to add to your toolbox. You know what I'm saying? Because finding that proper cadence for that night and for that set of circumstances, moon phase, current, whatever the case may be, that is going to be your difference in catching fish for sure.
Yeah. Ed, what's your thoughts about nighttime striped bass? I know that you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more fishing. I have the dart spins. I have not caught anything on one yet. I had a blue fish take a tail off, and that was about it.
Get out, real.
Um,
That's the
yeah,
worst.
yeah. It was
That's the worst.
actually we were trolling that one afternoon, Rich, down south.
Nothing
But
like a $6 soft plastic losing its tail.
yeah. For me, I prefer the paddle tails. I've used the underspin jigs. So
Yeah.
similar to the dart spin, but they're, it's like you said, it's an underspin. About 1/8 to 1/4 is what I've been using, and it works. The first time I ever made one of those jigs, I was out catching 20-inch schoolies. So
Yeah.
that's my normal go-to, and then I'll start. If they're not subsurface like that, I'll throw top waters, poppers, the old black bomber. We haven't touched on those.
No, not yet.
The black bomber is a favorite.
Yeah, that's definitely a staple. I totally agree with you. And like I was saying, like when you get into some of those much colder months, like a black mag darter, my God, the black mini mag is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I love those. Before we go, so I do want to talk about lures. Before I go until we go over to that, I do want to throw a couple of things out that came to mind as you were talking, Scotty, about the nighttime fishing and a couple of tips.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, when you're fishing at night, what is common is people will go and they'll look for dock lights or bridge lights or street lights that go over into the water, and you do fish those shadow lines. And a lot of times you will see those fish, or when you toss past and into the shadows and you start bringing it through the lights, you're going to see those fish. I have to say, as a piece of advice, remember, you don't fish for that fish that you see coming. Work the lure to imitate a bait fish, right? Because what invariably happens is, and I do this too, like full disclosure, I'm doing this right along with 99% of the people out there. I see that fish, I get a shot of adrenaline, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing anymore. I'm moving it weird. I'm stopping it when I wasn't stopping it. I'm changing the cadence to 3 twitches and 1 real long drop when I was doing, 2 twitches and a short drop. You just remain consistent. The fish is getting comfortable with the movement of that bait. Let it get comfortable. And if it doesn't hit by the time you have to pull it into the boat, you didn't spook it. It's going back to where it was, and you have another shot at it. Don't go spooking it by going crazy with it. And again, we've all done it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're fishing these lights and you want to fish the shadow lines, you have to understand where the shadow line actually is. Where you see it on the surface of the water is not where it is at the bottom. So if you think of a light unless it's, well, no, not even if it's straight down. If you have a light that's shining at 45 degrees to the water and you see this circle of light on the water, it's not underneath there. It's 45 degrees all the way down to the depth, to the bottom, to where that shadow line is going to be. And it's still going to be lit a little bit further beyond. So if it's 16 feet deep and the water is right on the surface and it's at 45 degrees, it's going to be out 16, 20, 30 feet is still going to have light. So you have to go well beyond that if you want to fish the shadow lines and work it back through. So a lot of people just dunk it right next to the light. Well, that's not the actual shadow line. It's lit up well beyond that.
Yeah, it was cast into the shadow line.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point too. And I will say this. I've just with some of the electronics that I have and my fish finder system, I was able to observe very, very interesting behavior with how those fish actually feed and what they do. So a lot of times when you have a shadow line, those fish are basically in a row down towards the bottom in that shadow line, and they're sitting in the shadow. Say you have 10 to 12 feet deep and you're seeing fish popping in the shadow line. Those fish are going to swim up, pop, go right back down and face into the current, sitting in the shadow line down towards the bottom. So once they go up and they make whatever they're doing, they make their feed, they're going right back down to stage right in that exact same spot. So those fish aren't just all buzzing all over the place like, like in a mad frenzy, like a blitz. Usually they're very deliberate with what they're doing.
And do you find that the larger fish are staying out of view?
Most of the times, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, in just to my experience, most of the time, those larger fish are always down towards the bottom.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say just about all of my larger fish throughout an entire season are all caught deep, and they're all caught on the bottom. By lumps, by rubble piles, by they're staged up, waiting for things to come up and over, like a piece of structure or something like that. But 99% of my biggest fish in a season all come from the bottom, always.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I will say this, most of it comes on like bigger artificials or even live baits as well. So, and that's something that we really didn't touch on, but we've talked about a lot in the past. But anytime you're going out fishing, you need your backup plans. You need your plan A, B, C, and D, because it's very rare that plan A ever works out. And you want to be able to make the most out of your time on the water, because like everybody, our time on the water is precious to us. So I personally don't like leaving the dock without having live bait with me or the ability to catch live bait. Cast net, whatever. Have peanut butter, have spot, have eels, have a mix of everything, because you just never know. And a lot of times and I fall into this too, like we get caught up in the glory of wanting to catch that fish on artificials. And like a quote that like I've kind of become famous for saying, but sometimes you gotta feed bass what they want to eat and not what you want to feed them, if that makes any sense at all.
It does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And live bait is key when it comes to just really being productive, because there's nights when artificials they're not going to work as well as live lining something, whether it be peanuts, whether it be spearing, whether it be eels, but whether it be spot. So don't get caught up in I got to use artificials only, because that just be open-minded is what I'm saying. So
I agree. I mean, it comes down to and back to your point, have multiple plans, multiple options available.
Yep.
It's the 2 is 1 is none. If you have one plan, you have no plan.
Yep.
Right. You have no options left. So if something doesn't work, you're out. I'll tell you, my best day striped bass fishing this year was on live adult bunker.
Yeah.
But my plan was artificial, but I went out and it's funny, I had a snag rig with me, but I just used a soft plastic I was using, and I just cast it into the bunker and snagged one and put it on a circle. But I couldn't agree more. I guess a lot of people think it's sexy to be out there fooling them with the artificials all the time. And man, I think it's fun. I think that is the most fun. But you know what's a lot more fun than not catching fish? Catching them on live bait.
Yeah. And you know what? And I will say that more than any other thing. Okay, I love my artificials. Love them. I'm not going to knock them. But for me personally, there is nothing like live lining for striped bass. It will always be hands down my favorite way to catch stripers.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, most productive. Like, especially like this year, everybody, it's very well known. This has probably been one of the most epic striped bass runs of like the last 10 or 15 years. And it's all primarily been a live line bite, a whole adult bunker live line. And just even the other week, man, it just had one of those days where it was just like you dream about having. And guess what? There not one artificial came out of my bag. I always have them, but it was all Liveline bite, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about the live bait. I personally, now again, so everybody is aware, now freshwater rules can be different. We're talking saltwater.
Yeah.
You need to use inline circle hooks if you
Yep.
have any type of natural bait, dead or alive. So I'll just share, for me, when I'm fishing for larger striped bass, which means an adult bunker, you have an 8 to 12 inch bunker on there. It's going to be a big fish that's eating that typically. I'm using a 9/0 inline circle Gamakatsu. What are you using, Scotty?
Here, right in the pack.
Okay.
Sometimes I even like to go up to like a 10-0, because it's a very big bait. And everybody has their preference for how to hook them, but I really like to go across the snout, and you want as much of that hook exposed as absolutely possible. You don't want these hooks buried, because you want these hooks, like once that fish, that bass inhales that bunker, you want that hook to be able to pull out of that bait and do its job.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and you got to be. So it's funny. I caught a bunch, and it was a 9/0, so it was a pretty big hook. And what was funny is I had it hooked through too deep, and every single bait, even though I thought it was going to break off, when they're going to swallow the bait, and then the bait would come off the hook. It never did. So it ended up like 30 feet up the line. So I'm reeling in with a dead bunker hanging there, which is not what you want to do, because it's going, it's grinding the braid through the bones and everything. But I agree. And it's something that I have recently. Hook it lightly through there. Don't bury it.
Definitely. And they have things out now. And if you're a boat angler, experiment with this, but get yourself a rigging needle. There's ways to bridle bunker. A lot of guys offshore use the bridle technique, but that's a phenomenal way to go about hooking the bait. It might take an extra minute to do, but it's absolutely worth it. Because you typically won't have a hook turn back in on the bait and miss hookups in that case. To me, like a bridled bunker is like that would be my number one way to go, but we don't always have that time.
So we talked about whole bunker. Why don't we touch on like Bob the Garbage Man's favorite, and also Andrew's, the chunk, the bunker chunk.
I'll tell you what, and I'll say this. So some of my favorite times striped bass fishing were back in the days when me and my brother used to get frozen mackerel from the bait store and just sit on the dock or the bulkheads chunking frozen mackerel to catch fish. I mean, like, that works. All right. You want as fresh a bait as possible, but there's something very, very nostalgic to me about chunking for striped bass, or chunking for anything, as far as that goes.
Yeah, I agree. Fishing with bunker chunks in the back absolutely works.
Yeah.
There's no difference between the back and the front. Maybe you're not going to have as many 50-pound fish or 50-inch fish coming in the back, but you will get some. And the ones that you have back there, a 22-inch striped bass is still going to eat a pretty nice sized chunk of bunker. I would add, though, I like to chunk in the backwaters with clam. And there are certain tackle shops. One that I recall off the top of my head in Wildwood is No Bones Bait and Tackle. They sell a 5-gallon bucket of clam bellies.
Mm-hmm.
So you just put that in the back of the boat. You just throw a whole bunch over. You stick one on the hook, and you just let it out. No weights. You can put a weight on if you want, but no weights, and just let it drift back in there. And wow, what a great bait!
Yeah, definitely. Even if you're targeting and I hate the term schoolie, but that's what they like, the smaller striped bass, an abundance of them. You can never go wrong with like like a flat sardines, and using sardines and chunking sardines as well. There's areas, especially down in Cape May, that you can do really, really well on that, because those fish are accustomed to feeding what's coming off those fishing boats, the commercial boats down there.
Right.
And also soft shell crab, cheddar crab is another one. In fact, I'll say this, like, I'm not an artificial purist by any stretch, and I always say that, but one of my first actual, like, I'll call it legitimate keeper size bass this year came on chunking early season. I didn't have the right tide that I was looking for, or that I preferred for artificials and targeting bass that way. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to chunk. And it can be a very, very, very productive way of fishing. So it's not something I do often, but I do it, and I do it a few times a year. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it.
I don't have a tide that I particularly care for.
Are you anchoring when you're chunking?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always anchoring, whether it's like channel edges, setting yourself up on a slope, or fishing like a dock system, that sort of thing. But yeah, I want the boat as still as possible. I don't want it to move at all.
Right. And one of the questions from Andrew: if the big stripers are at the bottom, wouldn't you need a 2 to 3 ounce sinker to get the chunks to the bottom? Not necessarily, because when you're chunking and you're anchored up, when you're chunking, you're throwing the baits out the back, and they're going out with the current, and they're sinking naturally. So if you have an unweighted, now you might want to weight it, right, a little bit, but when you throw your line out there and you free spool it out, it will go in relatively close to the same distance. Now, once it hits the bottom, if the current's too strong, it will start to pull up once you engage the reel and the drag. It'll start to lift. But for the most part, you don't need to do that for quite a while. If you have a stronger current, yes, you might need a 1 ounce, maybe a 2 ounce, depending on where you are. I don't think I've ever used a 3 ounce to stick a bunker chunk on the bottom and the back, though.
No, and I always went with the school of thought that the least amount of weight possible to get the job done. Because especially if you're not using, and I'll say this, I hate fish finder rigs, by the way. Some people love them. I personally do not like them at all. But and for that, you don't want the fish feeling that that you want them feeling as little weight as absolutely possible.
Right. So, now, are you using eels?
I do use eels. I do use eels, and I do use spot, but a lot of my eeling is done is not done in that way. I'm either drifting or casting unweighted eels, and working them like a lure. And I will tell you this, that is it's used a lot by surf guys, but it's very underused for guys in the backwater from boat, kayak, or even like land-based, because that eel is basically taking all the hassle of having to work a lure. That eel is taking that all out of the picture, and that eel is become a live lure that's doing all the work for you.
Yeah.
If that makes sense at all. But live unweighted eels and casting them and retrieving them and working them back like a lure is usually results in some of my biggest fish of the year, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think, Ed, do you agree that eels are, if not the best, one of the top 2 or 3 baits?
I've caught my biggest bass on an eel, so yes. But we will break the back. Like we'll whack them pretty hard so they don't coil around the line, because that usually becomes an issue. And then we work them back, or we'll weight them to the bottom. But
yeah, I'll say eels are. I personally think that if you're going to use live bait, generally speaking, now there are certain times where you wouldn't use eels, right? When big, huge bunker pods are coming through, you got a mile of bunker,
Yeah.
you're using the bunker.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, though, I think eels are probably the best bait. I can tell you, Scotty, nobody is going to use eels on a kayak unless they love eel slime all over them. They're just they're
No.
too difficult to handle in such a
It's-
small confined
it's
area.
it's like that for a boat too. I'm telling you, back in 2018, I don't think I was able to wash the smell of eels off me for
Yeah.
like the entire season. I'm not even kidding you. And I will say this: you never get used to handling them.
No.
I hate it. I mean, there's been periods where I was going through probably between 60 and 80 live eels per week. Just with the amount of bassing that I was doing, and they're good for all sorts of other fish as well.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, you can use the small pencil wheels for flounder. We're not going to get into that though. But yeah, eels are very underrated. You anything will eat an eel, really.
Yeah. Yeah. They're just like the
Yeah.
bigger version of a shrimp. Everything eats them.
Someone gave me a tip years ago. This was before they changed the circle hook for live bait.
Yeah,
They said to nose hook them with like almost like a tog jig, something that's very forward weighted.
yeah.
That way the jig tries to pull them down, but they swim against it and try to swim up.
So
A lot of action there. A lot of action on that eel.
yeah. So yes, I agree with you with that. It's something that I used to do, but
Yeah, we're not allowed to do that anymore because
No, we're
live
not.
bait and circle hooks. But
Well, you can circle hook a tog jig.
I'm going to tell you this. I have never once gut hooked a fish live lining on a bottom sweeper jig. Never once.
Right.
Never once.
I can't think of any time I have either. And I actually use variations for flounder fishing. So you'd think I could have.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, so we're at an hour. There are a couple of other things I want to go through. So we talked a little bit. Okay, so the inline gamakatsu hooks are what I use. You use those. Ed, you're using the same exact. You're using owner hooks, right?
I don't really use live bait for striper.
Oh, okay.
But I do have. I think I have a pack of owners.
I say that because
Yeah.
I was in his shop last week and I saw owner hooks all over the place. So
I love owner hooks. I really
Yeah.
did. And I actually use owners when I'm throwing unweighted eels. Actually,
they got some backbone to them, definitely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So leader material. Do you think the striped bass are leader shy?
yes, absolutely. And this might just be in my head, but I've done so much experimenting with leader material. It's not even funny. And I mean, everything that I'm saying is only my opinion based on. I feel like I've done everything there was possible the absolute wrong way, and I spent a lot of time up in my head fishing and wondering what it could be, and so like I've just narrowed things down to what I like. But when it comes to backwater fishing, I'm using 20-pound fluoro. My favorite to use is I love Yozori fluoro. 20-pound, not the pink, the clear. I want to be very specific when I say that because I've had a lot of unlucky nights on the pink. Maybe there's something to it, maybe there's not, but I personally don't like the pink fluoro, but definitely 20-pound and under. The reason why I used to use 15 all the time, but some of when you hook, if you hook a 30-inch bass, they do have the ability to roll and break 15 pretty easily. And a lot.
Scotty,
What's that?
I have on video from Saturday a probably 24 to 26 incher snapping 20-pound right at the boat. I'm holding the leader and it
Yeah.
just shook it and just snapped it right there.
Oh,
I mean, they're strong fish.
they are. And another thing, and a lot of people might not realize this, but those fish, when you're fighting them, they're rolling like crazy, especially the big ones. And you can feel their spines raking that fluoro. Like you can feel that fluoro going back and forth their high spines. And those spines are sharp. I mean, we've all been spined by a bass.
Yeah.
Just do it long enough and you're going to get stuck. And those spines have resulted in a lot of lost fish as well, from break offs. So, but when it comes to fishing out front for more like, I'll call them the ocean bass or the fall run bass, I'm using 50 pound, and usually never anything less than that. Anywhere, if I'm doing jigging, sometimes I'll go down to 30, but if I'm live lining bunker, it's 50 pound flat, because you never know what the heck is going to eat your bunker, you know?
Yeah. I haven't seen any, what migration bass, when they're biting, they're biting. You
Yeah.
throw it on a 50 or 60 pound leader, you're fine. I typically use 40. But then again, I'm also not out there going for the 50 inches very often because it's usually it's fall, in spring, there's no great weather to get out there. Ed, what are you using? Are you using the heavier?
I'm 20, sometimes 30, depends on what I got tied on.
Yeah.
For the backwater.
Yeah. And Scotty, for the line, you're using braided line. What weight are you using?
So 15 pound usually. I just because you never know what you're going to come across, you know what I mean? And you'll be surprised how much abuse 15 pound line can actually handle. It could take a lot of punishment. You can land some really big fish on 15 pound test. I mean, I've landed 40-inch bass on 15 pound test and still had enough headroom, I felt like. So when it comes to flats fishing, I really like to kind of scale it back a little bit further. You know what I mean? Like even 10 pound braid is enough to have fun and get the job done.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm using 15 inshore. I'll use 30 near shore. And honestly, I only use 30 because that's what I have on for tog. For wreck fishing, and I use the same reel, and I just don't want to respool it, so I just go the easy way, use the 30 pound braid, and I'll use usually 30 or 40 pound mono, and for me it's typically Raritan Bay type fishing, so the big ones are there.
Yeah, definitely. And with that being said, I agree with you. Usually for like my ocean bass line preference, definitely it's going to be 30 pound. And like I said, you can land some really big fish on 30 pound braid. There's no doubt.
Agreed.
But I'm currently using Cortland, and that stuff that it is freaking strong. It's like, that's like cable, that line. So I've landed, I keep getting personal best off that Cortland 30 pound braid. It's pretty awesome braid.
It's pretty good endorsement. Ed, what are you using?
The white. I think the white.
Oh, you're using white?
Yeah. And I'm not much really for crazy colors. I don't really care for the moss greens and things like that because I want to be able to visually see without having like some really bright line, so the white I can usually see pretty good. So
yeah, I'm using colors, the blue and the yellow typically, because I don't want to have to wear my glasses when I'm on the water, so
yeah, I totally
makes it easier.
With that being said, I just literally spooled a new reel with the purple Cortland, so
there you go.
Out of myself, but yeah. So, but I mean, I prefer a longer leader. So, I mean, it really shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't make a difference. It's whatever your personal preference is, really.
Yeah, I agree. Ed, what's your personal preference?
Ooh, tough question. I have like the rainbow of colors and sizes. Backwater stuff is going to be 15 to 20. I usually bring 2 to 3 rods, so it could be any combination on those 3. Tog, I have, I think 30 or 50. I forget. It's got the depth counting different colors and stuff, but 15 to 20 is my my go-to.
Gotcha. All right.
And we have a participation trophy in here with a PSA: do not thumb a bluefish.
So yeah, I saw a picture of a guy who thumbed a weak, or not a weak fish, a speckled trout. And the first picture was him with his thumb in its mouth, and the second was with the fang going through the side of his thumb and out the bottom. It's like he just totally forgot.
Man,
I mean,
I'll tell you what, shout out to my buddy Flood, and I'm throwing him under the bus right now if he's watching. But man, we were fishing one night, and we got into like a really fun bite on a dock light, and he brings the first one in. We think they're bass, and sticks his thumb in his mouth. He's like, "Ow, they're blues!" So make sure you know what kind of mouth you're sticking your thumb in before you do. Man, it absolutely shredded his thumb to the point where it could have like used a stitch or two, but it was hilarious. Made for a really good story.
Yeah, for you.
I made the mistake. I thumbed a little weak fish, and typically like their bottom teeth, they're nothing. Like they don't hurt, they won't cut you. No, but then he wiggled. He wiggled, and his fang was dead over top of my thumb, and he bit down. That was not fun.
Yeah, and they don't have incredibly strong bites, but those teeth are sharp enough to go through. That's like that speck that got that guy.
Flounder the same way, man. Oh my god!
I've been bit by flounder. Flounder are no joke. You wouldn't think that they have a strong jaw. Man, they can bite hard, and they bleed. I bleed a lot.
Yeah.
So for people that are not aware or are new to this, there are a couple of things that I do consistently that people should make fun of me for. I'm terrible at netting fish from a kayak, and I get cut on spines and teeth all the time. Yeah. So, if it's a bluefish and I'm bluefishing, I know I'm going to come back with multiple slices in my hands as I'm trying to unhook them, and I should use pliers, or, I'm trying to do it real quick. And
sounds like me when I'm fishing with crabs, man. If you've ever fished around me, you'll probably hear me howling for most of the trip, because I'm always getting pinched by crabs. Always.
Yep. Yeah. So, Scotty, so we're at about an hour and 15 minutes right now. Yep. Before we go, is there anything you want to share with people that we haven't been able to talk about today to help them get on the striped bass? So
really, my biggest thing, I would say, is do your experimenting. A lot of this comes down to what feels comfortable to you, and what you have personal confidence in. Because if you don't have confidence in your gear, in the lure you're throwing, the type of lure that you're throwing, it's going to come through in your presentation to that fish with that particular lure. So find what you're comfortable with, and ultimately do what feels good to you. Just because, say, like, I'm a huge fan of the dart spin, doesn't mean that you're going to pick one up and it might not work for you. The paddle tails might work for you. So
Ted,
do what feels right. Just do what feels natural to you. And that confidence is going to come through the bait and come through your presentation, hands down. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
I agree. Do you have anything you want to go through before we part with everyone?
No, I mean, I think Scotty's final message nailed it. Have confidence in yourself, and then do your homework. Find your spots, the smart fishing app and all that stuff, all those spots, and use it. It works.
It does work. Yeah.
It does. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to thank you for coming on and let everyone know that next week's a little different because, we do every Monday night at 8. Next week's Halloween, and I'm not surprised, but a lot of guests are saying, dude, I can't come on Halloween. There's going to be kids knocking at the door. I got to take my kids out. My wife is looking at me funny when I'm asking. So I don't think we're going to be on Monday. Well, we won't be on Monday night. We're looking at probably this is news to you, Sunday night. Whether or not you can do it or not, but we're going to work on that. But thank you to everybody for coming out tonight. We will be back next week. Just keep an eye on the Salt Strong YouTube channel. If you're an insider in the Insider Club for Salt Strong, it'll be posted in there as well. I will post it on Fat Dad Fishing pages. I'm sure Ed on the Captain Hank's Tackle, and will be putting it out as well. So everyone, thank you for stopping by. Everyone in the chat, thank you. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. You can ask them on the saltstrong.com blog page, where there's a post up about this. If you want any questions answered by me, Ed, or Captain Scotty Sevins, put them there and we'll get the answers out to you. So it's all housed there, or you could do it on YouTube as well. So with all that said, thank you everybody again. Thank you, Scotty. So until next week, until next episode, get out there